seated. So let's just check. Are there any sheep here this morning? Any sheep? Ah, see there's one sheep. Oh, there's another sheep. Oh, there are a couple of sheep. Okay, yeah, I know you don't quite know where I'm going with this, do you? But we'll come back to this question at the end. Well, do you remember ever playing Follow the Leader when you were a child? So if for those of you not familiar, you will know that the leader is the one who calls the shots. Whichever way the leader goes, whatever the leader did, the followers are exposed to imitate that. It was a fun game until some leader decided to do something, well, I suppose not smart, jumping over a ditch, which was an adventure until someone didn't quite make it and ended up getting hurt. Follow the leader goes bad when the leader goes bad, when the leader doesn't consider the welfare of those being led. But if we have a good leader, wow, what a wonderful game that is. I remember years ago, I was very involved in scouting, I might have mentioned, and when environmental awareness started to be a big thing, I went on an environmental awareness course for adults. And one of the things that we did was the leader wasn't blindfolded. All the rest of us was blindfolded, but not the leader, and we held onto the shoulder of the person in front of us, and we went like a snake. And the leader was one of us, and she was meant to take us past the rose bushes so that we could smell the roses and so on, so that we could feel and we could experience all the things around us. And I was about second or third from the front, and we were happily following this leader all around and trying to sense what we could sense. And suddenly I sort of felt my feet getting a little bit warm. And as I took another step forward, my feet were getting really warm. And eventually the whole lot of us just sort of jumped out of the way and snatched our blindfolders off, because our leader had seen this wonderful pile of ash and thought, won't it be wonderful if we go right through the middle of this wonderful pile of ash? But what she didn't know was that was all the ash from all the fires that had been made, and it was still red hot. So our poor leader actually burnt her feet. My shoes got a bit, I don't know, melted, and we jumped out of the way. But that was just an interesting story that I remember, that following the leader part. But you know, sheep are great at playing follow the leader. That herd mentality is large in a sheep's brain. So if sheep are in a line, and if you've ever watched them, they often do this. Once the one sheep decides, well, it's supper time, let's go where we're going, the others tend to follow. And apparently, I've never seen it done, but apparently if you hold a stick in front of the lead sheep and the lead sheep sort of hops over it, the others will all do the same. Even if you remove the stick, they will sort of hop over this where they thought the stick was. So the flock mentality is absolutely fantastic and very good. So Jesus, growing up in Galilee, he knew sheep, because sheep were, well, that was the dominant sort of agricultural, if that's the right word, thing of the day. Jesus knew their instincts. Jesus knew their needs. He knew their wants of the sheep. And he was surrounded, as was all the people in the day, in that homeland by sheep. Jesus used that everyday knowledge to reveal to the people he encountered the desire that he knew were actually quite large in their lives. Jesus always dealt with people on the basis of that one-to-one personal contact. But he also knew all about our communal needs, and we live in community, our desires to be connected in some way to this larger group, and he helped us to connect to the community. Jesus knew that we were needy sheep, and yet also hopeful for a leader to follow. And in some ways, this image of the sheep is really a bit strange, that Jesus identified himself as a shepherd, as shepherds in those days were not particularly well-respected people at the time. They were rough, they were strong, they were violent men who spent most of their lives out in the fields away from normal civilization. And they were certainly not the good, sweet, kind people that we imagine shepherds to be today. They were considered impure, dishonest, deceitful. Courts of law refused to accept their evidence. and yet from his birth, Jesus chose to befriend them, and God arranged it so that they were the first to receive the good news of salvation. Remember that just before Christmas time? It's the angels who announce the birth of Jesus to shepherds in the field, and those shepherds respond by seeking the newborn Jesus. So Palestinian shepherds used to gather their flocks together in one fold, in a sheepfold at night, and one of the shepherds would guard them while the others rested. And in the morning, when the sheep spoke to the gatekeeper, his sheep would recognize his voice and would come to him. And that was the same for each of the shepherds. The sheep knew their shepherd, and they would go towards them. And while they were further out in the field, the shepherd himself would lie across the gate of the sheepfold so that any wolf or bad animal or if something came in, they would have to get across him first. So if we look at verse 11 of what we read this morning, Jesus describes himself as the good shepherd, a shepherd who is caring, a shepherd who is devoted, a shepherd who is always present. So Jesus described himself as the one to whom the sheep respond and the one who safeguards the sheep. And in this way, Jesus describes himself as our shepherd, and in fact, even as the gate towards the sheepfold. We'll come to that in a second. So let's just remind ourselves about the structure of John's Gospel, because I think it's really important for us to understand how these people wrote and the intention of the book, so that we can really understand what they're doing. So we already know that the first half of the Gospel, John's Gospel, up to about chapter 12, is known as the book of signs. And a sign, we know, points in a direction. So if I want to go to Durban, I follow all the signs to Durban, and hopefully I arrive in Durban. John uses 7 miracles as the signs pointing towards Jesus as the Messiah. And I think so far on Sundays we've only had the one, haven't we? We've only had changing the water into wine in Cana. But also what's introduced this morning is John uses those I am statements, the very famous 7 I am statements. And where does it come from? Well, if we remember back with Moses in the desert, Moses was told to go back to Egypt and go and see Pharaoh and say, listen, let my people go, I'm taking them with me. And God called himself, I am who I am. And Moses, if you remember, didn't want to go to Egypt. He made all sorts of excuses, and God gave him answers for his excuses. And eventually Moses says, but what must I tell them? And they say, well, what's this God? What are you talking about? Who's this God? What's the name of the God? And God simply says, say, I am sent you. So that's where we get the I am statements. I am referring to I am God. That's what he's saying. But there's a bit more to it. In John 8, before our reading, verse 57, then the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? Have you seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. Before Abraham was, I am. So they picked up stones to throw him in, but Jesus hid himself and went out to the temple. So before Abraham was, I am. And remember what John said right at the beginning? Verse 1, chapter 1, in the beginning, say it with me, you know it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So before Abraham, I am. I was there long before Abraham. So Jesus uses those 7 I am statements, indicating his divinity and using them to describe himself as the way to salvation. And there's 7 of them. I am the bread of life. We actually spoke about that on Wednesday. I am the light of the world. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd, which we're concentrating on today. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I am the vine, which I think we'll talk about next week. And 2 of them are actually in relation to sheep. The one we've got today, which is I am the good shepherd, and the one before that, which is I am the gate. I am the gate to the sheepfold. So, and I protect the sheep by protecting the gate. And if you want to come through the gate, you've got to come through me. The only way to get in is to come through me. That's what Jesus is saying to us. So these statements are all metaphors, if you like, for everyday life that Jesus uses to describe himself as the way to salvation. And also notice that with the I ams, they are definite statements. Jesus is saying, I am. He's not saying, perhaps I am, or maybe I am, or I think I am. He's saying, I am. It's a definite thing. A writer called John Swartz, that I read quite a bit, said this: a story is told of a person traveling through an unknown country at night. The traveler's guide was up ahead. The person looked down but could not find the road. I can't see the way, the person cried out, and the guide replied, I am the way. Just follow me and you will reach your destination. So just follow me and you'll reach your destination. Follow him in the way. So the Christian destination is really a more perfect union with the Father. How is this possible? Well, it's possible through Jesus, our guide. When we can't see the way, when we can't see the path, Jesus is there as our guide. He is the way we have access to God, the way we come into the presence of God, and this way is open to all who choose to follow the one whom God has sent to lead us and to guide us. And I think I've said it before, but in the early church, before the word Christianity was invented, Christians were called people of the way of Christ. So let's try and put this all together. We are reminded that a shepherd is a guide and a leader, and for us, Jesus is the good shepherd. There is only one shepherd, one way to salvation, and that is Jesus. We are his flock. Those who belong to his flock recognize his voice. But Jesus is also the gate. All those who wish to enter the fold must go through the gate. Through the gate we find eternal life. And that is what you and I have done. We have entered the fold. We are members of the flock. We have Jesus as our guide, as our leader, as our advocate, as our comforter, as our redeemer. So let's put it in a nutshell. In a nutshell, what do we learn from the I am statements in the reading today? 4 things. Read them when you get home. Verse 11 and 13, he dies for his sheep. 14 and 15, he knows his sheep. Verse 16, the good shepherd brings other sheep into the fold. Verse 17 to 21, a bit further on, the good shepherd takes up his life again. So we see the passion story in that. He dies, we know that happened, but he knows us all intimately. The good shepherd welcomes all into the fold. And of course, the last one, the good shepherd takes up his life again, the resurrection. And we see that there. Isn't that wonderful? So let's go back to the beginning. I'll ask my question I started with. Do we have any sheep here this morning? Any sheep? Any sheep? We've got a few sheep. Oh, not everybody's a sheep, but that's okay. We've got a few sheep. Well, isn't it great to be a sheep? Especially when Jesus is the good shepherd. Amen.